Hi, this is our lecture on Period 6, Part 2 and 3, Industry and the Urban Era. First thing is looking at the fact that industrialization is this change from more of a rural farming to urban and factory areas. We've got a lot of laws and practices that favor business in order to produce this, and then we've got lots of development of factories to produce more consumer goods. So this has a massive effect on our culture of the time, all the way through till today. Several causes of this, one being that we are a country full of abundant natural resources, from coal to oil, iron ore, other kinds of products that we need for all of this kind of industrial process. The next one being innovation and invention, risk-taking, being willing to go and develop these factories, invest our own money, mechanize our agriculture, develop new technologies like the telegraph, the railroad, transcontinental. All of this, again, is this mode to go faster in terms of communication and in transportation. Generally, everything we're doing, we're trying to make it more efficient, faster, faster, faster. Our next cause is what is called or termed laissez-faire policies by our government. This is tended to be seen as a support for business side of the economic systems. The government actually just stays out of the economic system. They let competition and the marketplace control all of these. What we do tend to see for this, though, in this era is a subsidy for railroads in particular. The government invests tons of its money to help create these railroads. Why? Because they know that it's going to help move goods and people faster and further across our country, and our goal is, again, spreading and doing those things. It's going to help produce our industrial economy. We also see that we have abundant labor. We've got immigrants coming from all kinds of new places, all of the old places as well still, and they're moving into these urban areas because this is where the economic opportunity is. They're leaving their countries for many different reasons, and they're desiring to come to the United States. This is both a good thing and a bad thing during this era. We have a lot of new immigrants, as they term it, and this is more of the Asian mold, especially from China. And then instead of Northern and Western Europe, France, Germany, England, Ireland, those kinds of areas, we start to see more of the Slavic areas, and Italy being the groups that are moving to our country. Capital, or the investment of money. This is one of the big features of this era. When you look for the robber barons or the venture capitalists that some people call these men, Andrew Carnegie, John Rockefeller, and others, they are willing to spend their money, invest their money, and do things for their businesses in order to make sure they grow. This is also where we would see monopolistic practices, what is massive amounts of control of different industries, and the goal there is to eliminate competition. Why would you want to do that? Because then you have more power and control over what you are producing, who you are having to buy things from, and who you can sell to. You can control more factors. And that means you can make more money as one of these capitalists. All right, so let's look at laissez-faire policy a little bit more in depth here. This is one that a lot of people tend to be very, very negative towards, but there are some good things that come out of this method of dealing with things as well. One of the ideas that you get is that it creates more opportunity for profit. And if you've got more profit, the businesses can expand more and more, can hire more and more workers, build more factories, and therefore employ more people. And again, that is the idea that it is supposed to cycle more wealth to more people. It allows the owners, as it says here, to set the wages. There's no controls. Again, its government is staying out of this. One of the ways that we tend to define this system is called hands-off, or let it be. Another term that you'd seen in your notes, if you've done those for chapters 24 and 25, would be social Darwinism. This is the idea applying evolutionary theories of Darwinism to society and to business. If you're the strongest, if you're the best at doing something, then you deserve to survive, and the elimination of others is just a natural process. On the workers' side of laissez-faire policies, my way of remembering some of this kind of stuff would be to say that it is less fair to the workers. With no government regulation or control of industry, you would have no such thing as a minimum wage. The owners would set the factory conditions of what you're working in, how many hours that you are, who they employ, including women and children, and there would be no unionization. In this mold or mindset, workers are expendable, which means it doesn't matter what your skills or abilities are, you're able to be replaced. Laissez-faire policies tend to help the workers start organizing and developing what is called the unionization mode. Flipping around to some of these different technologies and all of this to remind you, and again, one of the most important industries of this era is railroads. Without the development of this infrastructure system and the investment of huge sums of money from our own government, we would not have been able to industrialize as efficiently as what we did. They produced tons of more jobs, not only just running the railroads, but then building the railroads, maintaining them, building the locomotives for them, all kinds of different jobs that are involved in this. Obviously, it's faster transportation. You go out and you ride a horse. Generally, you're looking at 10 to 15 miles per day with all of the stops with different conditions and whatever. Now with this, after steamships, you can reach many more places much faster and easier. The key to this is we are moving goods and people to new places, new markets, faster and further. We spread across our country, and all of these transcontinental railroads develop many new communities throughout our country. Wherever they needed water or coaling supply stations, there was a new town developed. Looking at some of the monopolistic business practices, there are two major modes that we are going to talk about here. Horizontal integration is buying up every company that is your competition in the same market. So this eliminates competition in that same kind of product market area. The most famous example of this is John D. Rockefeller with the oil industry, where he capitalized on putting out of business and then buying up the businesses of every single oil company that competed with him in terms of refining oil products. Horizontal integration, buying the same types of companies. Vertical integration then is buying up the suppliers for a product from ground to transport. Everything that you need from beginning to end of the process. The most famous example of this is Andrew Carnegie with the steel industry. He would do everything from buying the mines that were mining the iron ore to then the railroad companies that would transport that to his steel factories. He'd own the coal mines that are getting the coal for his steel factories for the smelting. He would own then the transportation of everything from his factories out to the industries buying his steel products. So a complete and total control from everything top to bottom. As you see on this slide, I use the example of a car. We've all been exposed to that. So that's buying up every single thing from the rubber manufacturing to the steel to the aluminum, plastic, glass, and then all of the different companies that help to produce the different pieces and parts of those cars. It helps to limit your cost, so therefore you can make more profit. As time goes on, we see more and more workers and people working to try to control this system. So we see the first steps of government intervention. Some of this, as I've said, no more or at least less laissez-faire. During our discussions, I remember a couple of you discussed very well the Munn v. Illinois court case. We'll mention here is the Interstate Commerce Act and Commission and the Sherman Antitrust Act and Commission that will happen a little later in our history. But these are these very first steps or early possibilities that the people are saying, we need a little bit more help on this business side, so can we at least control or regulate some of these things that are going on in industry. Munn v. Illinois, once again, a Supreme Court case that said that there are able to be regulations of business in the states. Unfortunately, it was overturned by a later case that says that if those railroads travel place to place, you cannot control them. All right, so let's shift gears again, as you've seen, moving on to unionization here. They have very specific demands. Overall, you see that they are asking for higher wages. They are looking for safer working conditions. They are looking for better hours. As I've mentioned in a couple of different places on notes that I shared, the slogan becomes 8 hours for work, 8 hours for play, or for me, 8 hours for sleep. So those are the general demands that almost all of them would have fought for. However, there are also some other groups that fight for different kinds of special demands. Big ones that you'd see are no child labor, equal pay, and some of the safe, appropriate treatments for different peoples that are involved. Lots of different techniques. We always are familiar with the strike, but understand that a strike is the last form that they would use. You've got boycotts, you've got collective bargaining, which is the most common. That occurs at all times between union and employer. And then you've got also arbitration once they have some things. And they would work very, very hard for political reforms. They lobby courts, they lobby, or sue through courts, They lobby to change laws through legislative branches. Strikes are extraordinarily well known, but they also are extraordinarily rare in terms of what unions want to use, because the workers are no longer working. They're not making money. It's not good for both, but it is the last resort, and it's the most well-known of these examples that we have. Talked a little bit about immigration. This will be our last slide in this video. Pull factors, things that they see and hear about from the country they want to go to, pulling them here. Definitely higher paying industrial jobs, better agricultural jobs being available. Tons of jobs are available. We are the boom area. Lots of different political freedoms and personal freedoms that are available here that aren't in their home countries. Push factors, or the things that are pushing them out of their homelands: famine, lack of food, lack of land, and then religious persecutions, also terrible governmental conditions and rulers. Main goals for many of them is to earn money and then to eventually be able to return to their homelands and then have their own lands, be able to afford more and provide for their families there. However, this is very uncommon for that goal to be achieved. Once they're here, they tend to stay here. We have a couple of goals once they show. We want them to Americanize or be assimilated, to be made as similar as what we can. We want them to learn our culture, our language, our heritage, and the things that make America American. What our goals with their education for these new people are in their lives here is to be able to be employed, to offer citizenship, develop science and technology so that they can work in these high-skilled factory type of jobs, so that they're able to maintain the things that we are wanting to achieve in our country. We'll continue the lecture on another recording in just a minute.